Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the fourth FINEX General Membership Meeting. Our host for today is a partner at PNA Grant Thornton and the co-chair of the Professional Development Committee. Let us all welcome Ms. Mai Bisnar.
Good morning pa ba? Good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful day. Don't you agree? It's a beautiful day. Agree daw. Welcome to the fourth Phoenix General Membership Meeting with the theme Navigating the U.S.-China Geopolitical Tensions, Implications for the Philippine Economy. Very interesting topic. So this GMM is presented by the Programs and Meetings Committee in partnership with the Professional Development Committee. To formally open, may I call on our President, Mr. Augusto Bengson, to call the meeting to order. President Toti.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm calling this meeting to order.
Okay, thank you, President Toti. Now, may I request everyone to stand and join us in prayer to be followed by the singing of the Philippine National Anthem.
Dear God, thank you for allowing us to meet at today's event. May you extend your divine wisdom to our speakers so they may be able to impart their knowledge and expertise. Bless all the participants that they will obtain vital information from this event, that they will go out and share what they had learned. In the spirit of your love and generosity, may this activity glorify your name alone. Amen.
Mga kababayan, ilagay po natin ang ating kanang kamay sa ating kaliwang dibdib at sabay-sabay po nating awitin ang pambansang awit ng Pilipinas. Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay, lupang hinirang, duyan ka ng magiting sa manlulupig. Di ka pasisiil sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong bughaw. May dilag ang tula at awit sa paglayang minamahal. Ang kislap ng watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning. Ang bituin at araw niya kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng luwalhatit pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mga api ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
You may please take your seats. So may we now call
Yes, and thank you for meeting. March 9th, Inclusion Committee held a forum entitled This Hotel for sponsoring this session. Committee Chair La Torre and Liaison Director Edith Estacio. Last April 3, our Life Icons had its first Kapiyan sa FINEX event where our members discussed programs and topics of interest to their group. I see Dr. George Shu, Life Icons, Frank Isaac, campaign for our year-round sponsorships. Several packages from anywhere from 300,000 pesos to 2 million. And as a year-round sponsor, we have many benefits. Aside from the logo in our FINEX website and homepage, acknowledgement during our general membership meetings, posting of your company's electronic direct mail collateral in our social media channels and email blasts. You will be feted during our FINEX week, as well as allowing your members or your company employees to attend our GMMs on a complimentary basis, and the FINEX directory ad placement. Um, we hope that you will find much meaning in sponsoring FINEX this year. At this point, I would like to express my sincerest gratitude to the following organizations for confirming this support this year. Platinum sponsors, Forecast and Planning Technologies, Inc., Ayala Land. Our gold sponsors, BPI, SGB and Company, KPMG, RG Manabat, PwC, Isla Lipana and Company, and Metro Bank. Our patron sponsors, PNA, Grant Thornton, and our minor sponsor, Jollibee Foods Corporation. This campaign, the funds that we raise allow FINEX to carry out our numerous programs and advocacies for the year. Something to look forward to, upcoming programs on April 27th. Thanks, Painted Kenya. Our sports and wellness committee from September 13th. Research and Development Foundation and the Physics Academy. The 11th offering of the Capital Markets and Fixed Income course will be in May. Thank you to Chairman, Committee Chair Noel Leico and Liaison Trustee Zondi Garcia. The fourth offering of the Senior Finance Leadership Program designed for new and aspiring CFOs as well as C-suite executives with finance oversight will commence on Friday, April 19. And the first Emerging Finance Leadership Program will be introduced this year for mid-level managers. Thank you to past presidents Jeng and Jimmy Ismail. Our FINEX Jeng Pascual and Jimmy Ismail. Our FINEX Foundation's Social Involvement Committee continues to provide free financial literacy sessions to all our stakeholders, especially the underprivileged members of our society. We hope that everyone can join this advocacy by being one of our lecturers or partners. And thank you to past President Chit Manabat as well as Menchu Serena. And finally, we enjoin everyone to recruit new members, especially from our publicly listed companies and top 1,000 corporations. I encourage each and every one of you to invite your friends and colleagues to join FINEX this year. We will continue to keep you informed of our planned initiatives, and we look forward to your continuing support and engagement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President Toti. So speaking of engagement, sabi niya, we hope to engage with all the members of FINEX. So now before we go any further with our program, it's been a continuing effort of the FINEX board together with the committee members and officers to make a deliberate effort to connect with our members and improve members' engagement, just like what President Toti has mentioned. In this GMM, we will take this opportunity to start with simple things, simple tasks. Ready? Parang hindi sila ready, President Toti. Are you ready? Yes, okay. Scan the environment muna. Scan the environment, look around. Look at the person to your left. Look at the person to your right. And to the person across the table. Okay, nakita nyo na. Then look at them again in their eyes. Give your biggest smile, the sweetest smile, and say, "Hi, you look wonderful. And I hope I will see wonderful people like you again in the upcoming activities of FINEX." Okay, let's do that. Left, right, across, and say, "You look wonderful. I hope to see wonderful people like you again in the upcoming activities of FINEX." See? So we all look wonderful. Okay, so another one. Ang hirap ng assignment ng MC. I have to do a selfie. Okay, I've seen people taking photos kanina, so please put them or post them in your social media. And just like the millennials, use hashtag FINEX. Ito raw, hashtag FINEX feels and hashtag. For those of you who do not know hashtag, ganito po siya. Yun po yung hashtag, parang number sign. That's the hashtag 4th GMM. Okay? G? Yung G ho is ready or go? Okay, let's have a selfie. So I'd like, Mike, please help me here. We'd like to please stand po para po sa gitna po tayo. Ang hirap ng trabaho ng MC talaga. So I have to do this selfie. Okay, ganito na lang. I don't think I can do a selfie. So what we will do, Aljon will take our photo. Okay, with your permission, we're going to post it in our personal social media so others will see what we are doing in FINEX. We are not just accountants or finance people. We can do some funny stuff also. Okay, katatapos lang ng April 15, so I hope medyo loosen up tayo. Okay, so pwede raw pong bumaba para lahat. Ako lang po makikita. Can we please request the people at the side to please stand and join the, this is an attendance. We'll send it to your office to make sure that we are here. Okay. Kakaya ba? Okay. So we have to sit down. Thank you, Liaison Director Gemma. Okay, 3, 2. Pati ito? Oh, naka 0.5 siya. Okay, thank you. So I hope you'll post all your photos in your social media with the hashtag tag po FINEX Phils and 4th GMM. Okay? Okay, thank you, wonderful people. Okay, now let's go back to the program. To introduce our new members who will be inducted today, may I call on the chairman of the membership committee, Mr. Domingo Go. Round of applause, please. May round of applause pa akong sinabi. Ay, yung mic daw. Siguro.
Good afternoon. So we now come to the induction of the new members. As I call you and your respective sponsors, kindly come up in front. First is Mr. Michael Celis Albotra, SVP and Head, Top Tier Department, IBG, CTBC Bank Philippines Corp. And the sponsor is Carlo Lazatin and Brian Trias. Second is Maria Rosa Aurora D. Cacanando, Senior Vice President, CFO, Insular Life Assurance Company Limited. Sponsor, Francisco Lim. Third is Carl Kendrick Chua, Managing Director for Data Science and AI, Ayala Corporation. Sponsor, Alberto de Larazabal. Next, we have Ponciano Michael O. Concepcion, President and CEO, Maharlika Integrated Logistics Solutions. Sponsor, Frank Isaac. Next, we have Pamela Teresa B. Di Mayuga, Vice President Finance, Gardenia Bakeries Philippines, Inc. Sponsor, Wilson Tan. Next, we have Annalisa H. Madlangbayan, CFO, Amscor Global Defense, Inc. Sponsor, Dr. Cheat Manabat and Carmen Serenia. Then we have Rufo R. Mendoza, PhD, Dr. Mendoza, Senior Vice President for Finance and Administration, concurrent VP for Finance, De La Salle University. Sponsor, Normita Villaruz and Wilson Tan. Then we have Frederick T. Pineda, Senior VP and CFO, Malayan Insurance Company, Inc. Sponsor, Susana Fong. And finally, we have Sara Saavedra Songalia, Managing Partner, Saavedra Songalia and Associates. Sponsor, Normita Villaruz and Wilson Tan. To add solemnity to the occasion, may I request all members to stand, and may I now call on our President, Augusto D. Bengson, to administer the oath of membership. Thank you.
To our incoming members, please raise your right arm and follow after me. I state your name. Having been accepted as, state your position, of the Financial Executives Institute of the Philippines, do hereby solemnly swear that I will faithfully discharge, to the best of my ability, my duties and responsibilities in the pursuit of its goals and objectives, that I will protect and uphold its constitution and bylaws, that I will abide by its code of ethics, that I will observe the highest professional, moral, and ethical standards, and that I voluntarily impose this obligation upon myself. without mental reservation or purpose of evasion. So help me God.
Thank you very much, President Totti, and congratulations to the new members of FINEX. Looking forward to see you all in the next activities of FINEX. Again, another warm round of applause for our new members. Maybe let's have a photo opportunity, yeah. Yeah. May we request the board, those who are present, for photo opportunity? John, board ba? Or sino nandito? Okay, so may I request President Totti to be with our new members for photo opportunity. Congratulations to the new members. John. Oh, isa pa daw photo. Okay, can we please request those who were inducted to stay on stage or here in front for the photo opportunity? Okay, Aljon, on your count. Say Phoenix. Congratulations to the new members, and again, another warm round of applause. Now I know you are very excited for our topic. It's a very hot topic today, and let's dive in already. May I call on the liaison director of the Professional Development Committee, Ms. Gemma Cheng, to introduce our guest speaker and our panelists. Gemma?
Hello, good afternoon. I will try to keep my introduction short because I don't want to keep you from the main event. I'll speak closer. Okay. Our main speaker today is Dr. Ronald Mendoza. He is a governance and institutional reform specialist with over 25 years of experience in development policy and public administration reforms. Nag-e-echo. Okay. He is presently a senior economist with the Ateneo Policy Center and since 2021, a member of the United Nations Committee of the Experts on Public Administration. Recently, Dr. Ron Mendoza served as Regional Director for Southeast Asia at ID Insight, a global advisory, data analytics, and research organization seeking to improve lives with the use of data and evidence. Prior to joining ID Insight, Ron served as Dean and Professor with the Ateneo de Manila University School of Government. Between 2000 and 2022, he also served as Chief of Party of Participate, a 3-year USAID project focused on supporting citizens' participation in governance and strengthening democratic and governance institutions. Prior to his involvement with Ateneo de Manila, he was an associate professor of economics at the AIM and the executive director of the AIM Rizalino S. Navarro Policy Center for Competitiveness. His research background includes work with UNICEF, UNDP, the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, the Economist Intelligence Unit, and several Manila-based non-governmental organizations. In 22 and in 23, Ron Mendoza was listed among the Philippines' top 100 scientists in the AD Scientific Index based on the total number of citations in the last 5 years. Ron recently wrote a paper entitled Navigating the Political Economy of Cold War 2.0. And so today, the Professional Development Committee invited him to our GMM to share his thoughts and views on this very relevant topic today. As panel reactor, we also invited Dr. Kala Weimer. She is an American economist who spent the first 2 decades of her career specializing on China before expanding her purview to East Asia broadly for the next 2 decades. She has taught at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, the University of the Philippines, the National University of Singapore, the KDI School of Public Policy and Management, and the Claremont McKenna College. She now keeps busy teaching her textbooks, Macroeconomics for Emerging East Asia, a book published by Cambridge University Press in 2022 to bright young students at Ateneo de Manila University and providing input on research at the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. In addition, as president of the American Committee on Asian Economic Studies, she moderates the Asia Economics blog. With her 4 decades of immersion in China and East Asia, we are sure that she will add further insights and interesting thoughts to today's topic. And for our FINEX members who are bikers, you would be interested to know that on Sundays, she likes to ride her bike out in Marcos Highway to Boso-Boso Highlands. Let's welcome the main speaker first, Dr. Ron Mendoza.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And hats off to Professor Weimer for taking that ride, which I have not had the guts to do. Marcos Highway is quite a difficult terrain to cover as a biker. I usually go to the UP side, which is a little safer. So I want to thank my friend, Paolo, who invited me today to give you a little bit of a taste of the recent research that I've been doing. I can't say that I am an expert in this area yet, I think. If 1 or 2 papers makes you an expert, I think I still have a lot more to write. But I do want to advocate to the economists in the room that this is an area that we must try to cover and try to analyze and try to look at the data, because the interface between geopolitics and geoeconomics is real, and most likely it will have an effect on our economic trajectory as a country. So let's not let the IR and political scientists sort of speak to all of the issues. A big chunk of it is actually related to economics. So I am an economist. I am not a political scientist nor an IR expert. And this paper that I wrote tries to look at several issues that are emerging or have emerged already. One is, it's motivated by this question: how do we continue to develop as a country, countries like the Philippines, for example, when the world that we are now introduced to after the pandemic is so volatile and uncertain? It gives new meaning to the acronym VUCA, right? I think it is already an insufficient acronym for what we are facing right now. Just within the last few days, basically surface-to-surface missiles were parked in several areas in the north that can reach as far as Taiwan and Taiwan Strait. They are now parked inside our country. Just the other day, there were over 300 drones and missiles sent from Iran to Israel as part of a counter response to obviously the brewing conflict and brewing tensions between those two countries. And then you have several key passages that are now being choked by conflict risk. As you know, the Houthi rebels and what they can do to international trade, the costs of goods that we are now facing, which were already perturbed and disturbed by the pandemic and have really just started to recover, are now affected by a lot of these risks. The typical word that sort of covers all of it is geopolitics, but clearly they do deserve analysis, each and every one of these risks, and how it can affect the country and its economic trajectory. The other word that I will actually explore is the term called de-risking. De-risking has gained a lot of traction starting last year when the G7 decided it will de-risk but not decouple from China. And the entire idea is to actually give firms, including yours and many other international firms, a chance to adjust in a sort of calibrated and careful way to these tensions that we are seeing without necessarily brewing protectionism and complete cutting off of economic linkages, which is going to be quite destructive for the global economy and will basically contribute to the globalization that we are now seeing. That's a term coined by some economists, including in the IMF, where they're looking at global economic prospects and world growth, and they are forecasting that global growth will continue to slow down. So we are clearly not in the globalization period that we enjoyed in the past 2 or 3 decades anymore, where we were integrating with free trade agreements, with multilateral sort of agreements. That is no longer the situation. So the key question coming back to us and those of us who are committed to see our country develop, keep on developing, is how do we continue to keep on developing, attracting investments, and producing jobs that our country needs despite all these challenges. So I gave my paper the catchy term, navigating Cold War 2.0, but essentially the basic question is how do we keep on developing and industrializing? So the picture here, just to give you a quick sort of picture of what's going on, is essentially four aircraft carriers. This third one, you see this guy, is called a helicopter carrier, but it's called a helicopter carrier because they were trying to skirt around their constitution, the Japanese. They are not supposed to have aircraft carriers based on their own binding constitution that was to prevent them from rearming again after World War II. But that is now, they're finding creative ways to sort of work around it and actually arm themselves and boost their defense forces. But this is essentially 4 aircraft carriers going through the Philippine Sea in October of 2021, when we were all struggling. Maybe the flavor of that month then was Omicron, when we were all sort of locked down and struggling with the pandemic. These 4 monsters were in Philippine waters, demonstrating this basically ability to navigate the freedom of the seas and basically demonstrate that it's still open. So this guy over here is the Ronald Reagan. Just to point out that it's one of the most modern warships in the world. It costs about $7 billion on a good day to produce one of these warships. And it costs about $7 million also every day to operate a carrier task force group. The Americans have 11 aircraft carriers. So you can imagine the sheer cost of actually projecting this kind of power to sort of establish the rules-based order that we enjoyed for the past 2 or 3 decades to establish the kind of growth that we have been sort of enjoying in the region. So there's a big cost to this, and now there is a call by the Americans for other countries to chip in and play a major role. So there is this new player in the block, His Majesty's ship, Queen Elizabeth, which is a brand new aircraft carrier of the British. So that's UK. And of course, the Japanese helicopter carrier Ise. The one on the back, for good measure, is another aircraft carrier, the Carl Vinson, also of the Americans. So you can imagine I think this is actually largely unprecedented to have this kind of firepower concentrated in one place, but they saw fit to demonstrate this in October of 2021. So I will start with a description of why this area actually matters to the Philippines. And thankfully, more and more economists are now sort of backing this particular effort to boost our blue economy. And I say this not just because of the school I studied in and became a dean in. It's actually an important leg in our economy for obvious reasons. We are the second most archipelagic country in the world after Indonesia. And a lot of our resources, largely untapped, are actually in the maritime sector. It's not in the terrestrial sector. And I was sort of contemplating with a few economists, we don't have agrarian reform in the blue economy. We didn't parcel out the area, and we don't have these institutional rigidities in that sector. So there could be some ability for us to invest here, attract foreign investments, and actually boost this as another leg for our economic growth this decade. And in fact, there is a blue economy bill right now prioritized in the legislature and the Marcos administration. It's critical for us for obvious reasons, but our take on the blue economy is the sustainable use of resources in this sector, as opposed to other countries which have been very, very strongly focused on extraction. And in fact, the kind of extraction that we have seen in areas that are disputed is completely destructive. So it's, if you remember the lectures on common pool resources, when something is shared or when something is not owned by any particular entity, it is at high risk of being exploited because no one is there to protect it. And so part of the issue with these disputed territories is the kind of practices that are going on there that are very, very destructive and actually deplete resources which could have been sustaining our food production for decades to come. So our emphasis is on the blue economy and the extraction of resources there in a sustainable way, and to grow the blue economy as a possible leg for the Philippines' development. Now, it's important for us for many reasons. I'm just going to go through very quickly. 86.3% of the Philippines' total territory, second largest archipelagic country in the world, as I mentioned, fifth longest coastline, 70% of the Coral Triangle, which is the richest area in the world, in the entire world in terms of biodiversity. And obviously, these need to be updated. 10th largest fishing caste, fourth largest shipbuilding, and leading provider of global manpower. I'm not sure if we're still fourth on shipbuilding, but we're certainly still up there because of the investments that we have absorbed. And again, locating again to the present context with friendshoring and nearshoring, there is a present effort to try and link us to the demands of some of the countries that we are allied with, both in terms of economic development, but also national security, to try and tap us and invest in our country in order to be basically creating jobs, but at the same time securing the region. So these are some of the industries that can be boosted in the blue economy. And I'm not going to belabor this point. Vertical ocean farming, it can actually be boosted further. There are some areas in the south, for instance, that are utilizing this, but with low technology. Then there's ocean-based renewable energy. You may have heard of investments in this area, some of which are still experimental and not really very scalable yet. But offshore wind is certainly an area that is now receiving a lot more investor attention. And then marine biotech. My friends in UP Marine Sciences Institute tell me that if we do not invest our capabilities in this area, it will be other countries that will discover all the intellectual property and technology benefits from this area, and we will not be the ones sort of benefiting from it. So this is an area also that we must look out for. Seabed mining, obviously another area and sort of often a point of contention. If you look at Benam rice, now renamed as Philippine rice, which is almost as large as Luzon Island itself, which is awarded to us. Essentially, we have been clarified as the caretakers of this area. 13 million hectares underwater, larger than Luzon, and is potentially a rich source of natural resources, right? So this is our blue economy and something that we can use as one of the legs for continued economic development. The challenge, of course, is with this kind of a situation is you do have our disagreement with our large neighbor, as they have been popping up not just on the western side, but also on the eastern side as well, right? So they have been showing up in that side of the Philippines already. And that's how it starts, no research. This is sort of the first way that they get in there, and then later on they start building islands and taking over. So I don't need to explain to this crowd all that has been taking place in our country, but for completeness, I will include here that the strategies that China has been deploying, it has been named creatively as salami strategy, cabbage strategy, but essentially the main point of this strategy, as explained to me by the experts, including my good friend Admiral Romel Ong, who is a professor of praxis in Ateneo School of Government, is really to choke areas so that you are unable to enter, and when they are the only ones sort of demonstrating real occupation of that area, then they start to sort of deepen that occupation, right? So they start to drive away our fisher folk, and if that's all you need to drive away, then that's the weakest sort of sector in our society, with 30% poverty, if you think about the fisher folk. And so these are the types of strategies that have been deployed. There's a lot of research on this already, so it's not even just my terminology. And China has almost deployed 80 different gray zone tactics against Taiwan, Japan, Vietnam, India, and the Philippines. And these are the countries that we're actually now working to establish alliances with. A major coup of this administration was to establish this strong sort of alliance with India, right? As they too have recognized our claim in this area, and our ongoing talks with Taiwan, Japan, and other areas, other countries, I should say. At stake in the South China Sea is an estimated 11 billion barrels of oil, roughly 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, and over $3.4 trillion of trade transiting through that area every year. So clearly there's a lot of economics here. So I just wanted to show you how close. So the main point of this is not really to explain how you can blockade Taiwan. I'm not an expert in this, but I was reading this and I thought you should know that after Speaker Pelosi visited Taiwan in 2022, the Chinese, to express their displeasure, decided to demonstrate how they would essentially blockade that country if they were to want to take over. And basically, they implemented a lot of military drills and exercises all around Taiwan, demonstrating their capability to isolate that area. And this is probably how it will start if they were to try and take over. And my main point here is, you see that little bump right under the Bashi Channel? That's us. And if you think about Batanes and even some of our smaller islands, it's even closer up there to all that action. And that's where some of the investments are now being made to try and secure that area in our country. So the discussion about any potential blockade, any potential takeover of Taiwan, any potential pressure put on Taiwan, Philippines appears to be, in a position geographically that no other country is placed in. So again, I am not an expert in the IR thinking on this, but just looking at this from an economic lens, clearly, if anything happens there, we must start thinking about how our economy will continue to develop and withstand it. Right? That's my take on it. So exercise area 5, there were several exercise areas that they implemented then. This is an area positioned between the southern end of Taiwan and the Philippines. It is an important sea area in the center of the Bashi Channel, an international channel, which is a strategic location for the transportation of cargo by sea and is located at a choke point connecting areas with the so-called first island chain, the Philippine Sea and the Pacific Ocean. Furthermore, important communication cables, such as for the internet, have been laid on the ocean floor in that area. Note that part of this exercise sea area is inside the EEZ of the Philippines. One UAV was confirmed in this area during the exercise period. So they were even sort of stoking tensions with us as they were demonstrating this potential blockade scenario. Fast forward to my topic for today. So that's sort of the broad context why we should be thinking about these things. And I'm going to show you later the amount of trade we do with China, Taiwan, and Hong Kong put together, and our necessity to look at this trade and its ability to be flexible in just in case anything happens. So de-risking has been one of the words of last year, and it is obviously being prioritized by many administrations this year. And the key thing about de-risking is that the G7 actually popularized this in one of their decisions, that they want to de-risk rather than decouple, as I explained earlier. Decoupling actually teeters on the brink of protectionism. Let's just be very candid about it. When you want to decouple and you have a populist leader, typically it will be anti-trade and want to cut off all of these goods and services, which are often mutually detrimental to the economy's concern, right? In fact, some of the sanctions implemented by the United States under the previous president were actually rolled back because they were producing more harm in their own country than in China. So these things need to be thought out very, very carefully in order not to, number one, escalate the situation, and number two, to try and continue on your economic development track. You certainly don't want to punish yourself in order to, well, basically assert your national security and sovereignty. So you have to be smart about it. So 27% of the world economy, the G7 nations decided to de-risk, not decouple in early 2023. We are pivoting away from discussions of decoupling or a complete separation of economies, and now basically trying to navigate what it means to de-risk. And I can assume that this crowd actually has a lot of ideas on how you actually manage risks, in finance and in the companies that you run. It is expected to mitigate these risks without necessarily severing economic ties completely. So that's the goal. Okay, so what are the possible de-risking areas if you were to conduct a risk assessment of the Philippines right now? And I'm only going to focus on one, by the way. First one is in the economic system, and that's really my main focus area. But you can also look at the political system and how certain countries are trying to influence politics in different countries. So it's very clear that there's finance going into different political areas, political parties, but even politicians. Not just even in our country, but in countries like Australia, where some of them have faced basically the rule of law to try and correct the situation. There's also people flows. So I think someone was going to ask about the sudden increase in the number of students from a certain country up in Cagayan. Something like this was asked earlier when I was just waiting. This is certainly an area where we don't typically have strong restrictions, and in fact are very welcoming as a country. But from a security vantage point, now need to start thinking about. So, and again, my advocacy to this crowd is, how do you do that thinking and be very careful about it without swinging all the way to protectionism and closing our country, which no one wants also, right? So that's one of the concerns, and it's I guess a legitimate concern. By the way, we used to have 1.3 million or so tourists from China every year in the Philippines who contributed heavily to our economic growth. And it was very inclusive because it was spread through many parts of the country, but we are not sort of attracting those numbers as of yet, especially after the pandemic and because of the economic challenges of China at this point. So the de-risking in the defense and security sector, when you start building, for lack of a better word, pogos near some of our naval facilities, maybe not a good idea. So these are things that we also begin to think about, at least from a defense and security sector vantage point. There's also discussions on how robust or vulnerable our energy sources are, our transmission grid for energy, some of our main sources, of energy production, and then where some of these are located in terms of key areas in the country. As you know, with the 7,600 islands or so, strategic location in different parts of the country is quite important. And then finally, geography and natural resources. Again, who owns the mining? Where is it located? Is it sort of a sensitive area and all that? So my main focus is on the economic system, and supply and production change going to be critical. Financial and debt flows. Where did we borrow? And are we actually over leveraged? Information and technology flows. Energy supply. Information and technology flows in terms of the ICT networks, who controls them, and then also the social media platforms, what kinds of influence operations can be conducted there. These are all sort of well studied at this point, where there are real efforts by different countries, not even just our big neighbor, but other countries trying to influence democratic elections. And then energy supply, as I mentioned. So far, my work has been focusing on supply chains. And part of my work is to look at how potentially these tensions can boil over to the economic side. And so on the economic side, we've seen that some of these tensions translate into ways that, so previously globalization allows for us to benefit mutually from this kind of trade. But now, because of these geopolitical tensions, they can be used to inflict harm on particular sectors in the economy. This is just one example. When China banned lobsters, wine, wheat, and other products from from Australia, and this obviously created some harm in the Australian economy. Now, I'm not going to belabor this point, but this is just one clear example where when this ban was implemented, other countries filled that gap that Australia used to fill. So in effect, they benefited from the ban. So you have a Chinese market space that has now since been filled by New Zealand, Mexico, the United States, and including some of our ASEAN countries. So this is the kind of situation we're faced with. And if you're thinking about building economic and national security alliances, you're thinking, well, if one country gets punished, how will the other countries respond? Will they take advantage of the situation? Or will they actually stand with you and say, well, that's not something that we support, no? So the effectiveness of these kinds of economic levers to apply political pressure also depends on our situation, our alliances with the other countries. So we are not immune to these. As you know, I'm here in front of Secretary Quisha, who probably knows about this ban. But they have responded to some of our actions, including taking it up to UNCLOS, and to express their displeasure. They have actually expressed, the kind of pressure that they can apply on different parts of the economy in different regions in the country. If they can do this, then I think it is incumbent on us to look at the flexibility and agility of our country to withstand this kind of pressure, right? Because it will start to create its own political economy. There will be groups in the country who will try to temper our foreign policy and try to emphasize that we may not necessarily want the wrong end of that geoeconomic tension. And fair enough, because it can harm our economy and it can harm our assets. But of course, how do you sort of balance, asserting our sovereignty, which we should do, versus mitigating that economic harm? So, what have I been doing? Basically, trying to examine the kind of exposure we have, which before was seen as a mutually beneficial sort of arrangement, which again, globalization has been pushing. And if you look at the exports of the Philippines to the world, this is the latest data I could get from Harvard in this nice, neat format. 1/3, roughly 35% of Philippine exports based on 2021 value is accounted for by China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan. So you can imagine that if anything happens in that Taiwan Strait area, this is the kind of, share of our exports at least. There could be many other areas that we need to look at to see whether we can withstand any pressure applied to this, right? So if this were disrupted next week, how would our economy sort of respond? How would our producers respond? And if you're looking at two sides of it, one is exports to China. And if they decided to, let's say, embargo our exports, like banning lobsters or banning bananas, but this time on a bigger scale, where would we find the alternative markets? And if you look at this kind of export mix, can we do something about it to diversify it better and mitigate the potential risks? I think these are the key questions to the private sector that I would like to raise. And some of it I've been trying to think of as well in terms of our economic strategy. So I've had the pleasure and honor of being involved in our Philippine development planning. And of course, some of the steps that we are taking in order to boost our industrialization and economic development is going to produce hopefully some upside on mitigating the kinds of risks that we see here. For instance, in terms of nickel ore, the so-called green metal that we can also try to develop further. And if we find ways to find new markets for this sector and sort of mitigate our exposure to a country like China, then we do have some flexibility in this area. But I'll point out that this large export to China on integrated circuits, semiconductors and chips, is one of the contentious areas right now, as you know, with the Americans. And I'll explain a little bit later. Imports from China. So it's not just that we need to sell products to our partner countries, but also we need to import some of these products because we need to consume them or because they are input trade. We need the input in order to produce the final output as part of a production chain. So if you look at the kind of products that we have here in this product mix, a deeper dive should reveal what kind of flexibility we have on the import side. And just in case China cuts our imports, can we find alternative supply sources for our continued consumption if it's here in the country? And then sort of if it's input trade, how do we realign value chains in response? Or potentially prior to that scenario, rather than trying to realign it when it has already happened, right? So here, I was just thinking if you have these small marketplaces near you, not here in Makati, but maybe in the other places in the country, we import a lot of these very cheap products manufactured in China, and they certainly are forming part of our retail trade sector. And if those products were to be cut, then obviously some kind of impact on consumption can be predicted from this. So we need to prepare and think about that kind of a scenario if we were to implement de-risking. So the other side of de-risking, and I'll begin to wrap up on this other side. The first side is that we mitigate our own risks faced as a country. And it's not just the Philippines, but other countries as well in the region. The other side of it is that de-risking offers opportunities for us. So it's not just a negative story, that there's so much trouble in the world that we need to mitigate risks and maybe even protect ourselves. No, it's in fact, how do we play this smartly? That's why I said navigating Cold War 2.0. How do we play this smartly so that we keep on developing? Let me remind you that even in the first Cold War, countries actually developed during that turbulent period. As long as they navigated all those relationships very, very purposefully and carefully, it is still possible, right? So here, one of the areas for partnership is the area of semiconductors. I won't belabor this point. In August 2022, Biden administration enacted the US CHIPS Act, basically to try and respond to some of the risks that they now face, because they are now producing only about 10% of the world's supply of semiconductors. And a lot of their companies started to invest in Asia, which is where the bulk of the semiconductors are now designed and produced. So East Asia accounts for 75% of global production of semiconductors. So for those of you who are not familiar with what these things look like, these are very, very small things. I had the pleasure of visiting one of our plants in Tanawan, Batangas, run by Murata, which is a Japanese investor, hired several thousand Filipinos to work here and produces several 100,000 semiconductors a week in that one plant in Tanawan, Batangas. And they wanted to keep expanding, actually. Within those gadgets that you have there, that's easily about 700 to 800 semiconductor chips embedded in each of these gadgets. And I'm told by the technical experts that it's a way to manage the heat that actually operating these gadgets can produce. So suffice to say that in the present scenario where we're boosting technology and advancing in the use of these high-tech products, we need a lot of these inputs. And apparently we cannot produce enough of it. There's sort of a latent demand that needs to be responded to. And the US-China tech war, which is centered around transformative technologies, including artificial intelligence, quantum computing, microelectronics, semiconductor manufacturing systems, telecoms equipment, supercomputers, specialized software, and internet solutions. All of these areas are now potential areas where if they de-risk, we might be able to benefit by bringing some of the investments over to a friend, which is what we apparently are at this point. No? So what is taking place is onshoring, bringing it all the way back to the United States, and friendshoring, bringing it to a country where you have strong economic and national security alliances. Bringing it back all the way to the United States, I would argue as an economist, is not a smart move for the Americans. It will be very costly, will require a lot of subsidies. There's a reason why their companies shifted it all to Southeast Asia, because we are super competitive in actually producing these products, right? So bring it all the way back there, just that sheer cost of adjustment is going to create a lot of inflation, a lot of price increases, which they don't really need at this point. Bringing it to a friend, which is really the friendshoring argument, is likely going to be in the middle of keeping it where it is and bringing it all the way back home. And much more, I would argue, much more economically feasible. So recently, this news is very fresh, probably 2 weeks old. You've had several high-level visits, including the visit of our president to Washington, D.C. last week, and a decision to actually boost or help boost our microchip production here in the Philippines with renewed foreign direct investment commitments by some of the American companies. Now, granted, some of the economists in the country are arguing this is just a small footprint at this stage. It's not really that big yet. It can be part of a broader strategy to try and benefit from that friendshoring wave, right? And if we're always getting beaten up because of our high energy cost and poor transport, the challenges with our transport, we can try to leverage, many more advantages that we can as a country, including on the geopolitical front. So here are the recent visits, including of the chief trade negotiator of the United States. We have 13 back-end semiconductor plants in the Philippines. And now there is an interest to try and double the production of these plants, which is probably going to be good for our economy, and also from a technology point of view of actually upgrading our our technology here in the country. And there is now a greater realization that the United States need to add more economic engagement to its military and security cooperation, because actually with all the focus on the arms buildup and investments in national security, the bulk of the action is going to be economic if you're thinking of a Cold War. So it's really how you survive it that will be key. So friendshoring, the biggest winners here is Vietnam and Mexico. Just on the data produced by the IMF, across 2017 to 2022 alone, Vietnam increased US import market share from 2% to 4%. Mexico's manufacturing exports to the US have gained 26% from 2020 to 2022 alone. So clearly there is this effort to nearshore, friendshore, not necessarily onshore, bring it back into the United States, which is, as I mentioned, probably going to be very, very expensive. The US now absorbs around a quarter of Vietnamese exports, 1/4 of their exports. So what are the sort of openings for taking advantage of this? So as I mentioned, just to be clear, there is a de-risking part where we need to manage our own risks based on the geopolitics that we're seeing. Then there is a challenge to actually take advantage of others' de-risking and benefit from an economic development point of view. This is now the taking advantage part and sort of benefiting from it. So some of our national security investments can now be located in the country and produce jobs here, such as this example of Coast Guard vessels being built in Cebu with foreign direct investment inputs and technology. And then the defense industry ecozone that is about to rise in Bataan with the heavy collaboration with our national security sector. Our challenge, however, is much more complex, as Sec Carl would know. We have been manufacturing a lot of electronics for several decades now, but it seems that we have not been able to go up the technology chain, the value-added chain. We got stuck on the light inputs where it's really labor, right, and packaging. So we start with manufacturing. If you're looking at a smiling curve framework, standard in terms of basically narrating the challenge of countries to ascend the value chain. You have that first step in terms of design and development and marketing and brand management, and then the final step in terms of R&D and sales and service. So if you're looking at the continuous development of a country, you don't get stuck in manufacturing. You try and improve your value added by engaging on these higher value added activities. And eventually what you want to do is get up there in terms of R&D. So I've been asked to try and wrap up, which I will do anyway. I have only a few slides left. This is what the chip manufacturing sector looks like. And these are the countries involved. No, this is the upper part of the value chain, and this is the lower part of the value chain. We are in the lower part here with Malaysia and Vietnam. If you want to go to wafer foundry, China, Japan, Korea, and Chinese Taipei, these are the players there. And I am told by our colleagues in this sector that they are now heavily advocating for transferring some of that wafer production here in the Philippines. Also as part of their possible de-risking, but also because of our growing competitiveness in this area. And if we manage to go into this last part of the value chain, we'll capture an even bigger part of it if we go into design. However, we have so many challenges to overcome, including the challenges in our education sector. If you want to have a robust research and development sector, you do need a very, very strong education sector. And economists like myself have been arguing that, we have to start thinking about the restrictions in our constitution, which may actually be preventing heavier investments in our education sector, including the one that I'm operating in right now. Because if you want to go into this sector, we really need to bring not just the money, but the technology in. So that's the quicker way to do it. Not just to bring in the 1 or 2 PhDs who manage to come home every year. This is not gonna, reach critical mass. We need to bring in large numbers of professors, researchers, and that goes with the investment in this area if we were to open up in this area. So industrial development in the blue economy, this is just something inspiring that I saw, which I think I'll end with this message, that what you want to do is boost the sector, but also go into the higher value added part of that sector, which is essentially design, right? It's well known that our ships are actually designed for other places, not necessarily Philippine waters, which is why they are so vulnerable to our typhoons and other shocks that they may encounter operating here. If we were to build this as part of many other aspects of the blue economy, we might be able to strengthen our national security while also creating many, many jobs for the country. So I think I'll end there and welcome the discussion next. Thank you. Did I remove it now?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers to inviting me to this really interesting event. I appreciate the opportunity to get to know our main speaker and the eminent members of this organization. I've had a chance now to read a number of papers written by Professor Mendoza and have learned a lot from them. I appreciate the framework that he has given us for thinking about the issues that surround the Philippines with respect to this whole U.S.-China situation. So let me take what he said and jump off from that. I have to say I was especially happy to hear that he welcomes foreign faculty and universities to the Philippines with charter change, but I'll come back to that in a minute. So navigating Cold War 2.0, I'm going to add just a little bit in a few slides to some of the data on trade and where the Philippines stands in that. So issues, China versus the US, issues on the China side, obviously a lot of problems here. Aggression toward the West Philippine Sea and Taiwan, the whole framework for the Chinese economy and society, state capitalism, repression, surveillance, and I've lived for many years in China. I know well how this works. Nothing like FINEX going on in China. Spontaneously, people organizing, gathering around their own interests, assembling and speaking freely with each other. Doesn't happen in China. The party state controls everything, and organizations like this don't form on their own. Slowing growth, although the most recent numbers from first quarter GDP were actually pretty good. But inevitably, inexorably, the slowing of the economy due to population aging and the decline in absolute terms of the population and debt weighing very heavily on the Chinese economy. My own country has its issues too, and I don't envy anybody who's trying to be an ally with the United States in this day and age. Obviously, the political uncertainty and dysfunction in the US, which is quite distressing to me as an American. Professor Mendoza talked in one of his papers about the Cold War 1.0 and how clear-cut the differences were between the US and the Soviet Union and the principles that the US stood for with regard to democracy, freedom, trade, global order, that provided leadership and that could be a rallying cry for people that believed in free trade and free markets and free people. And all of that we're sort of losing now. So the US, it's much more murky, you know, on its principles of free trade and governance, you know, it's not such a model to look up to anymore. And that makes it tougher to say who are the good guys and who are the bad guys and especially, if we move, perish the thought, move back into a world of Trump as president of the United States. So, it's not so clear cut as it used to be that the US is the good guy standing for all the right things. And the other side in the Cold War is the bad guy and doesn't live up to those same kinds of principles. So not an easy world, but within that, as an American, I'm glad to see that the alliance between the Philippines and the United States has been strengthening under the current president. And I find such an affinity between Americans and Filipinos. I have lived long-term now in 4 different countries besides the Philippines, China, Japan, and Singapore. And in every one of the other 3 countries, I've always felt a need for an expat community, a place where you could go and talk about the country that you're living in and be critical and, feel a camaraderie vis-a-vis the country that we were living in. I never feel that in the Philippines. I have no expat community here. I don't associate with expats at all here. And I don't feel any need for it because the affinity that I feel with Filipinos easily meets all of my needs socially. So I'm glad to be here and glad to have the alliance between our countries strengthening. So the whole idea of de-risking, the direction of globalization now, I think in many ways is a good fit for the Philippines to de-risk and become more globally involved. And foremost in making that argument is a piece by Robert Baldwin on Vox EU. It was a series of blog posts that he did, where he said he pushed back against the idea that we are in a time of deglobalization, because he said there are parts of what's going on globally where there's a lot of new activity and a lot of potential for growth. And what he identified foremost is intermediate services. That's a big growth area in global trade. Manufacturing, not so much anymore. And that's such a comparative advantage for the Philippines, intermediate services. So there's opportunity there. And globalization is becoming more regionally oriented, less expansively global, but within regional blocks, that there's a lot of vibrancy. And so for the Philippines, being part of an area where many countries are quite actively and openly involved in trade in Southeast Asia, that's also a good sign. Philippine comparative advantage and de-risking, well, intermediate services, obviously there's a wide open global market, and as Americans, we all have exposure to the BPO operations, the call centers. Just last week, I called my insurance company in the United States to see about getting reimbursed for the surgery I had on my arm when I broke it descending along Sumulong Highway. And I wrote that introduction before this happened, and I probably wouldn't have noted that if I knew that I was going to be out of commission now for a while. But the bill for the surgery was over 300,000 pesos. It's a very messy 5-part fracture in my arm. And so I called my insurance company, and the person I spoke to was here in the Philippines, a Filipino woman, and she gave me the answers that I needed. And she was very surprised to be speaking with an American in the Philippines. And I was not at all surprised to be speaking with her, that I would end up speaking to a Filipino, because that routinely happens when Americans reach out to call centers for any reasons. And it's very clear to me why the Philippines has excelled in that. I mean, people it's very easy to engage with them. Filipinos have a very calming influence. Usually when you call a call center, you're in a rage about something, or you have a problem that needs to be solved. And Filipinos are good about that. There's the ma'am and sir, and they treat everybody respectfully, put everybody at ease. So why are Filipinos excelling in services? It really has a lot to do with the culture and what your president has called the graciousness of Filipinos, and I experience that all the time. So intermediate services, that's where Baldwin sees globalization heading, and the Philippines is a good fit for that. China could be a part of that, but the whole wide world can be a part of that. ASEAN, of course, these are very different countries in ASEAN, and integrating such across such a diverse block of countries is not easy to do. But the advantage that China has had going for it for so long is that it's big. And the countries in ASEAN by themselves are small. It's hard to get the economies of scale, the economies of scope that China can offer unless there is more integration across the region. So that's a direction to head. Professor Mendoza has talked about maritime resources, the blue economy, and that certainly is a huge advantage and largely untapped, or great opportunities there, except that's where you butt right up against China head on. So that's a tough one for Cold War 2.0. So let's look beyond some of the numbers that Professor has given us as a starting point. And I want to focus especially on services and the role of the Philippines in this global service economy. So we've got measured, do I have a pointer here? Maybe not. Is there a pointer? Okay, so this is period of time 2019 to 2022. We're measuring exports in the positive direction and imports in the negative direction. So we can see overall in the exports of the Philippines about 115 billion US dollars in 2022, and that is substantially short of the $160 billion in imports. So a large current account deficit for the Philippines. However, the picture for manufacturing and for services is quite different. So the deficit is substantial in the goods component of the current account, with exports at about 58 billion, imports at 127 billion. But with services, there's a big surplus for the Philippines, and we can distinguish between services of produced services. So that's things that are produced here domestically. That would be the call centers. And then the factor services where you send labor abroad. So, all of the shipping personnel and all of the people, the nurses in the United States, the workers who go abroad as providing factor services directly. And if we take the two of them together, service exports about 54 billion last year, and imports more like 33 billion. So on the service side, big surplus. On the good side, an even larger deficit. But as far as growth potential, services are where the world is headed toward for greater trade among nations. And so that speaks of opportunity for the Philippines. Regional export shares, here again, I'm going to break down between all products and distinguish that from services. And now this is in value added terms. So I think the numbers that Professor Mendoza looked at were in final value terms. So it captures produced inputs, material inputs to production, some of which might be imported, and perhaps not that much value added in the export content. Here, the database that's available from the Asian Development Bank gives us by country and to a fine degree of distinction across goods and services, commodities, gives us breakdowns by value added, in value added terms. So China is hugely dominant when we look at in value added terms, all products. But when we look at services, China is much less of a service producer as far as international trade is concerned. Service exports from China, I give it a much smaller space. And of course, what fills the gap, Singapore is much bigger than overall, and Hong Kong much bigger than overall. And the Philippines really comes to the fore to a greater extent. So for all products, in value-added terms, about 1% of the region's exports, and for services, 2.8% of the region's exports. So again, more of a player in services trade. Now, this is too complicated to go into. I don't have a lot of time today, but I'll tell you what is being examined in this figure. And I think it was mentioned that I moderate a blog, the Asia Economics blog. There's a blog post that contains this graph and goes through it in detail. So if you're really interested, you can follow up with that. But the breakdown here is, get that pointer again, is from each country to these three distinct entities: China, East Asia, excluding China, and the rest of the world, and to each of these countries from a breakdown by China, East Asia, excluding China, and the rest of the world. And the orange is intermediate goods and services. The blue is final goods and services. And when we do these breakdowns, what we find for the Philippines is that compared, especially all the comparisons lately have been with Vietnam and how Vietnam is overtaking the Philippines. Well, the Philippines, as far as intermediate services, is very strong. Intermediate goods and services. We could break that down further by services and goods distinctively, but I haven't done that so far. So here's Philippines. So, China's destination from the Philippines, intermediate services, but the rest of the region and the rest of the world also clearly are pretty big. And here, keep that on the right line here. And then much less so with final goods and services, and very little in the way of final goods and services in value-added terms going to China, most going to the region and to the rest of the world. Just to pick on Vietnam, a much different trade profile. It exports final goods and services. It's following the Chinese model to a greater extent, importing intermediate inputs and doing some value added in manufacturing and exporting final goods and services to the rest of the world, as opposed to intermediate goods and services. So complementary there, not really competing for that niche. And this is what I have prepared to say to you. And I think with that, I'm happy to move on to the discussion part of the panel.
Thank you, Dr. Mendoza and Dr. Weimer. I know all of our attendees here are ready to ask questions. We have some mics in the middle of the stage, in the middle of the floor, no? And just feel free to stand up and you can ask your questions to our panelists. I'm Paolo Azarin. I'm the co-chair of the Professional Development Committee, and I just like to, before we start, thank our panelists this afternoon, no, for the very interesting discussion. I guess to start off the questions on Ron, for Ron, on the blue economy, which you advocate quite a bit. You know? So it seems that it's very capital intensive, and obviously Philippines being capital constrained is one of the key hurdles, no, in terms of fully accessing that. Do you envision some sort of a multilateral kind of approach to maximizing the blue economy as we move forward and try to develop those assets?
Yes, that's a very good question to start out with. First, I would not call the Philippines capital constrained. I think we have quite a bit of capital. The question is whether we have the risk capital to actually devote to this sector. The blue economy, actually, there's some growth areas in the blue economy already. If you think about maritime sector and our people, that's already big. If you think about shipbuilding, that's already big. And obviously, we have a big but still technologically deprived fisheries sector where we can increase productivity, lessen losses and leakages. Obviously, the value chains can be improved with cold chain and other things. At one point, I was presenting data on lobsters, for instance, in the Philippines, where it is ultra cheap in Basilan and Sulu, but check out how much of the lobsters are in Pasay, near the U.S. Embassy. Diba? Parang it's here in the country, but the cold chain is not there, right? So there's money to be made even for the private sector to invest in this. But we have not had the kind of critical mass in terms of investments yet. But in certain sectors, offshore wind, the kind of renewable energy I was describing, there's now sort of growing interest in that area. And potentially an investment in an institutional innovation to create a department of blue economy so that we put a lot of political will around this particular sector. So I'm actually quite bullish in this area. And I think a country of about 7,600 islands should be bullish on investing in the blue economy.
Thanks, Ron. For Kala, one of the things that you mentioned also in your talk that you found interesting is human capital and opening up of human capital for us to be able to, for the Philippines to be able to move up the value chain. So I'd just like to get your thoughts. On
I
that.
was actually very happy to hear Professor Mendoza advocate for the charter change that is needed to have foreign faculty and universities be present in the Philippines. And I was glad to hear it because my former colleagues at the UP School of Economics, 8 of them, have recently put out a working paper opposing charter change. Economic charter change, this is, that the current proposal is focused on 3 sectors, of which education is one. As somebody who has actually surmounted the hurdles to become employed at universities in the Philippines, initially at the UP School of Economics and now at Ateneo, it is tremendously difficult for a university here to hire a foreign faculty member. And I mean, really extremely difficult. So I agree that it could be a game changer for the Philippines to allow a greater presence of foreign faculty and universities. I think this is the best place in Asia to be an academic. It has things going for it that no other country in Asia has. First of all, English language fluency. That's a big one. And people from the rest of Asia would love to come here and study, I think, if it were easier to do. And if there were a more globally oriented opportunities to study here. The pedagogy is completely different from the rest of Asia. And having taught at the National University of Singapore, I've taught in Korea, I've taught in China. My early career was at the University of Hawaii, where there are a lot of Asian students. I got a very good sense, of the backgrounds that these students come from and the nature of the pedagogy in other countries in Asia. And it's not like the Philippines, the sense of inquiry and debate and willingness to engage in controversy, the way that the students interact in class with each other and with the professor, you don't see that anywhere else in all of Asia. And so I think that it could be a very welcoming environment for Americans, for Europeans, for students from elsewhere in Asia, but it hasn't happened. You know, it just hasn't happened because nobody is looking to do that. And now UP economists are saying they don't want charter change here. And why is that? Well, there's one person in particular whose writings I have been following on this. He's a former student of mine, and you may know him from his Rappler columnist role, JC Punong Bayan. And so I've engaged a little bit with him. And, you know, what I think in kind of an indirect way I'm inferring from him is they don't want the competition. You know, so that take that, everybody else. But what about Filipino students? I mean, in the United States, our universities are now pretty much dominated in the faculties of people from other countries, and including an awful lot of Filipinos who go to the US, get educated, and don't come back. They find jobs in the United States teaching American students. And that is all to the benefit of American students who gain tremendously from that diversity in the experiences and perspectives of instructors who go there. So thank you for letting me speak out on that. Obviously, it's self-serving, and so I'm aware that that's the appearance of it.
I guess back to Kala, I did have a question for you on China in particular. Recent print of their GDP number was very encouraging. Although there's been a lot of talk prior to that print that China's entering this stage where Japan was in the 90s. So how is that, I guess, the economic thinking within China and the implications for the rest of Asia economically and geopolitically?
Yeah, so the report of first quarter GDP growth yesterday was 5.3%, and that surprised on the upside. The big drag on the Chinese economy is the property development sector, which is totally tanked and had suffered from overreach, too much indebtedness, building out beyond what there was a market for. And the government had tried to slow that down, and it has now tipped into deeply contractionary territory. So the property sector is such a drag on the economy and will be for a long time. You know, the overbuilding and the unwillingness of people to take risk in property development now is going to be a drag for a long time. What seems to be driving the growth is exports have been really exceptionally good. And the government is now pushing for investment in sectors where there is a global market for Chinese products. And growth in the US has been high enough, and in Europe, that there's a demand out there for Chinese products. But it's worrisome, you know, in the whole de-risking framework about the kinds of things that China is looking to export. So especially, you know, green economy, technology things, the batteries and the cars and the solar, and they're doing it all with heavy subsidies that drives out production in other countries that can't compete. So, you know, when I read in one of your papers about how it used to be so clear cut that the US was in favor of free trade, and, you know, the enemy, the Soviet Union, was obviously not on the right side of that issue, it's gotten so much more complicated now because China is a big player globally, and it's not playing by the rules of private companies that have to cover their costs. It's a government-driven economy where anything can be subsidized to any degree.
Ron, if you can,
I'll just
speak to that.
So if you recall, the first Cold War was about democracy and the free markets. This was really the battle. And who gets to keep on producing nuclear missiles while still producing bread and butter for their population? And guess what? It was the US and its allies that won that battle. And it was seen as a victory of their system, basically of free markets and democracy. There's a lot of talk on free markets, but they are not as free as, you know, we actually teach in economics at this point because of the revival of industrial policy. So if you talk about free markets, but some of our trading partners are heavily subsidizing energy, heavily subsidizing food, one of the realities, we always get beat on high energy costs. Well, the other ASEAN countries are not just not taxing their energy, they're actually subsidizing it. We are not subsidizing and also taxing our energy. So how are you going to win on that kind of a platform? Obviously, sort of your. So the other thing on democracy, and I think this is an area where I want to write more materials on, and I hope I can collaborate with Professor Weimer here. Democracy gets into institutions, and institutions are very important for the kind of trust necessary for the technology we're talking about. The technology we're talking about is in terms of who gets access to the information on your phone. It's not just an economic argument. Which technology provider, which service provider do you want to go to where your right as a citizen to privacy is most protected? Which country provides those kinds of institutions? So it's not just a competition of what is the cheaper phone and what is the cheaper telecom service. It's the embedded institutions represented by these products. And the services, Professor Weimer is correct, the types of services we will be provided that embeds that kind of exports and manufacturing and all that. So I think this is really that part of the situation where we need to keep on winning hearts and minds in this country. Do you want a centralized system where you have that kind of a system where, yeah, there are efficiency gains because it's centralized, but if you get it wrong, guess what? You get it horribly wrong. Democratic systems are often noisy. Sometimes you elect not so good leaders, but you have checks and balances that you aspire towards and keep on building over time. So I think if you think of a country like India versus a country like China, my mentor, Danny Roderick, he was thinking, I'll put my money on India because it has the ability to self-correct. It will make mistakes, but it will try to correct because of their systems. The other country, there is a challenge, particularly when you concentrate power in the hands of a few. And it has direct economic implications, again, on the services front.
Any questions from the crowd? Yes, please.
This is to Dean Mendoza. I just wanted to take the opportunity to satisfy a curiosity. In the book, How Asia Works by Joe Studwell, he talks about the challenges of why the Philippines, for example, has not moved up the value chain. And that's because we have failed to take fundamental improvements that would create a stronger middle class that would aspire for more, and industries that were basically coming in prepackaged and we're not learning the fundamental technologies behind them. Hence, our inability to move up the value chain because those higher technologies are still controlled by the foreign investors. Just curious, since we're hoping to move up the value chain in semicon and other industries, is that thesis correct, that we have no chance since the technologies are owned by foreigners?
Thank you so much for that question. I think, again, my specialization is in governance and political economy. So not as hardcore as Professor Weimer here on macroeconomics. But my take on that is, and I have the same book, by the way, we have the similar reading. There's a lot of political economy around getting stuck in that space where you are not really advancing technology. Why? Because there's a lot of risk that you need to take to advance. And there's a lot of thinking on market failure where you don't have economic actors, firms, taking that risk where many other firms will benefit from the risk you singularly took. You have a company, sir. Will you take a risk for your company and the entire rest of companies in this room will benefit from the risk you took? No, you will underproduce that kind of risk taking. So there's extensive thinking on that already. And that's why industrial policy plays a key role, right? And that is what actually generates a lot of debate in our country, because our track record on industrial policy is very checkered. Some success, but a lot of failures. So that's where you get a lot of these discussions. Do you want to play that game again? Do you want to subsidize steel? When I was a kid, they called National Steel because STEAL, not STEEL, right? And we never became a big time steel producer, even though we had a lot of use for steel. And right now we're thinking of it again in terms of nickel, right? So I guess there's that risk, not just on the capital side for firms, but also on the political side for the kind of governance you need, good governance you need to implement industrial policy well. Can we still do it? I think we do. And I think that's where the debate with my colleagues in UP School of Economics comes in, because I fully understand where they're coming from on openness, because I share this view with them that openness is not a development strategy. We need to get good governance in place so that when you open up, you have a game plan and you actually have the good governance to implement that game plan well. We did not lack for opening up. Actually, we opened up a lot already, but we don't have the good governance to, maximize the benefits, including inclusive benefits for more Filipinos on that openness. So you have farmers losing, you have fisher folk losing, you have many cheap apples and then oranges that you can now buy, but our mangoes are not, necessarily getting to the other place or as much as we would want it to, right? So that's the kind of support and good governance we would need to actually boost on that side.
Okay. I guess we just have Kala and then we can close.
Oh, okay. Just to add to that, that I have been privileged in being here to teach the very top stratum of students at the University of the Philippines and at Ateneo, but it's a thin stratum. And when we look at the broader indicators for educational performance in the Philippines, they're not very good. And so for movement up the value chain, especially in services, education is just all important. And that stratum needs to widen, as to who can perform at a high level to be globally competitive as workers in the service sector and in developing new technologies and all those kinds of things.
Okay. Thank you, Kala and Ron, for that. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Mai, our MC, to close the program.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mendoza and Dr. Weimer, for that very interesting insights. And of course, to Pau Azarine for that very interesting discussion in moderating the session. So we'd like to call on our president, Mr. Toti Bengson, and of course, the license director, Ms. Gemma Cheng, to present a token of appreciation to our speaker and moderator. Oh, speaker and panelist. Si Paolo wala pa. Wow.